On January 17, 2013, a brief zoning ordinance was introduced for consideration by the Chicago City Council. The ordinance was striking in its simplicity, but it would be devastating for the people affected by its political goals. In a single sentence, the authors of the ordinance sought to eliminate a group of institutions that had provided affordable housing to thousands of men for more than 100 years. The ordinance would have added Section 13-64-025 to the Municipal Code of Chicago, stating, "Cubicle hotels are prohibited." But the ordinance proposal, introduced by Alderman James Kappelman and endorsed by 8 other members of the council, also ignited a firestorm of protest from the nearly 400 men living in the 2 remaining Cubicle hotels and advocates for the homeless. The controversy also shed light on an important group of institutions in Chicago's history, which have permitted vulnerable men, many low-income, transient, disabled, or elderly, to live with dignity and a sense of community that might otherwise be unavailable. I decided to pursue my own inquiry into the 2 remaining Cubicle hotels, the Ewing Annex Hotel at 426 South Clark Street and the Wilson Men's Club at 1124 West Wilson Avenue, and concluded that they provide important benefits to the residents and they should be preserved. Cubicle hotels date back to the late 19th century and primarily serve thousands of transient workers coming into Chicago in search of jobs. These workers came on a seasonal basis and usually worked in factories or on construction sites. The accommodations were not luxurious, but they provided residents with safe and cheap lodging. In many cases, the hotels were former warehouses or lofts. Open areas were subdivided into tiny cubicles with sheets of corrugated iron or large wooden boards. Because these dividers didn't quite reach the ceiling, the extra space was sealed off with chicken wire, thus giving them the nickname cage hotels. This type of lodging was a fixture in Chicago throughout the 20th century, along with flophouses, large open dormitories, potentially holding hundreds of men. These accommodations were particularly important during the Great Depression, when thousands of Chicagoans were unable to find work in standard housing. In 1940, a man could sleep on the floor of a flophouse for 5 to 10 cents, on a cot with blankets in a flophouse for 25 cents, or in a private cubicle for 35 to 50 cents. At their height, as many as 50,000 people lived in such accommodations. After researching the history of cubicle hotels, I wanted to learn more about the 2013 ordinance that would have banned these accommodations. I talked to Jim Field, the Associate Director of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, who played an important role opposing the ordinance. Field told me that he visited both the Ewing and Wilson hotels soon after the Kappelman ordinance was introduced. He quickly determined that the facilities were safe, clean, and valuable to the men who lived there.
So it was clear that this was a really good place. I mean, everybody in there would rather be living at the Hilton if they could, but they just can't afford it. So, and the city had just forced them to put $500,000 for new windows, new air conditioning, so it was kind of a little schizophrenic of the city, to do this. So I made decision then that this was something really worth fighting for. And it's really about getting rid of poor people. That's really what it's about. But they don't want to come out and say that. So part of our job, did you ever see The Wizard of Oz?
I do, yes.
You remember tearing the curtain back and behind it's this old guy. It isn't quite as powerful. Well, that's what we do. We tear back the curtain and really show who the person is. We got it so hot that at a certain point we asked for a meeting with the mayor's staff. We met with the mayor's staff and they said, this is dead. So we then kind of put it to bed. We keep an eye out on it, but we're also not, when you're down there, even though that is across from Metropolitan Correctional Institute, someday somebody's going to come to the owners who own that land and say, hey, what if we give you $10 million, you can retire and go to Palm Beach. So that's one of the reasons we fight to preserve stuff like that.
Jim Field suggested I visit the Ewing Annex Hotel and speak with Michael Bush. Bush has been the manager for more than 12 years. Prior to that, he was a resident. What type of people live here, or who lives here?
Well, I have different people from all walks of life. People who are just scraping by on the street, panhandling for money every day to eat and pay their rent with. I have guys that work for selling newspapers every day. I have streetwise vendors here. I have students here. I have people from all different types of jobs. They're just all going through different, situations in their life, like bankruptcy, child support, and what have you. Starting over again, either from come out of the hospital or prison.
Would you say that the tenants are like close knit? Does this feel kind of like
Pretty
a
much,
community?
yeah. A lot of these guys have been here for years, and companions and friends, and they talk and have coffee every day and discuss, current events and watch the news, play games, and watch movies or whatever. Go bowling or different stuff like that.
I asked Michael Bush what would have happened to the residents if the ordinance had passed. His response wasn't positive.
Well, some of them probably would have had some type of support, but a lot of them would not have. They would have to either stay in the streets or in the shelter.
Michael Bush gave me a tour of the Ewing Hotel, and I met several of the residents. A man named Jeffrey showed me his 5-by-7-foot room. Jeffrey is physically disabled and unable to work. He told me he would have been forced to live on the streets if the Ewing had been shut down. Do you like living here?
Yes, it's quiet. Nobody bothers you. Occasionally, a couple of these guys get a little intoxicated, but they're pretty passive. They're not really aggressive. It's not safe to be anywhere, but I feel safe here because I'm in like my element. Not afraid of anybody.
I also met Tyrone, who has been living at the Ewing for 5 years. Tyrone was grateful to be able to stay at the Ewing Hotel because he was previously homeless, living on Lower Wacker Drive for 2.5 years.
It beat living in the street. See, I stayed on the Wacker Drive for 2.5 years.
You did?
And I've been to all these missions and all these different places. And this is I can't say salvation, but this keeps you from being in the street.
Right.
Do you feel safe here?
Yes.
Do you have a lot of friends, or do you feel like there's a community?
Excuse me?
Do you have a lot of friends here, and do you feel like there's a community?
I have a few friends here, and this is a community. We look out for each other.
If the ordinance came up and it was passed, what would happen to you, or where would you go?
Well, my sister want me to move in with her. The vets want me to move into different places that they got. But right now, I'm kind of content with where I'm at. When push come to shove, I got somewhere to go. Some folks don't have nowhere to go. Some people ain't got no place to go.
Right.
And as long as these cubicle, I can only speak for this right now, but as long as this is here, it's somewhere you just home.
Right.
This is home.
I reached out to Alderman Kappelman seeking a comment for this documentary, but he never responded. While the ordinance was being considered, Alderman Kappelman always asserted that he was acting to safeguard the men living in the cubicle hotels. In his assessment of his achievements of 2013, Kappelman wrote, quote, "I urged the owner of the Wilson Men's Cubicle Hotel to make serious improvements to this residence. The results are that the men now have an eating area so they don't have to solely rely on soup kitchens for a prepared meal," unquote. At the conclusion of my research, I decided that the cubicle hotels are, above all else, communities for the men that call them home, and an important resource for people with few housing options. I remembered something that Michael Bush told me. These places shouldn't be shut down. If anything, we need more of them.